Welcome to the latest Watercolors Aquarium Gallery podcast, brought to you from the Aquarium Rush Studios in downtown Grand Rapids, Michigan. My name's Ben.
I'm Amy.
And I'm Charles.
Today we have a special guest on the show.
So exciting!
Today we have Bill Backus, who is the owner of A&M Aquatics, our favorite saltwater wholesaler. How you doing, Bill?
I'm doing fantastic. I'm happy to be here with you guys and looking forward to this. Thanks for having us.
We're glad to have you here. I think it's going to be a good time. So we're just going to first kind of find out a little bit about who you are and what you do, and then we're going to try and peel back the curtain a little bit and learn a little bit more of that other side of the hobby that a lot of us don't get to learn too much about, the wholesale side and the import side. And then, maybe even get into why the heck things are so expensive now. So I've always wondered about you. Did you start out as a hobbyist?
I was a hobbyist when I was young.
Yeah.
So I always had a fish tank, or I had snakes, or I had catching frogs or toads. I grew up on a lake in southwest Michigan, but I really got into fish as a diver in Florida with trips down to Florida, and got passionate about the ocean, and that's kind of what drove me to get into the industry. Did you start out in the wholesale section, or did you start out in retail? I started out, believe it or not, as a collector in the Florida Keys.
Really?
I am from the mid-Michigan, born in Michigan, raised in Michigan, went to school in Michigan, and went to school at FIT down in Florida, and then short time after that moved down to the Florida Keys. I knew somebody that was a wholesaler in Fort Lauderdale, and he was telling us about how his divers made a living, and it sounded like something that we would really be interested in doing. And it sounded better than working in a computer lab, which is what I was doing at the time, when I didn't know if it was daylight out, light or dark, or raining or not. So moved down to the Keys and had absolutely no idea how to catch fish, where the fish were located, anything. Yeah, and totally, it was a total big learning curve, and lived on peanut butter and jelly for a number of years. And
what year was that?
That was probably about 87, 88.
87, 88. I lived there in 93. Did you know that?
Yeah.
Yeah. And I lived in Marathon. Oh, I think we did talk about that when you were talking about
You lived on a boat, I think, at the time,
I did,
right?
Yep. Yeah.
We probably drove by your boat sometime.
Probably.
And raised a couple eyebrows.
Yeah. There's probably some loud music happening when I was there. We did that a lot. So how did you make the transition from collector to wholesaler? It's been an evolving career. As we got better at collecting, we sold to a number of shippers in Florida, and then we started shipping ourselves, and we were selling to other wholesalers throughout the country. Then we started the export business. The majority of our fish were going to Asia or Europe. So at this point, were you working for the wholesaler still, or you had just started doing the one out of Fort Lauderdale, or we started?
No, I've never worked for him. We did our own thing. We sold fish to him, but we were independent, and we just continued to build up our facility down in the Keys and started shipping out of there. We were around in the early time of when all the regulation was going in place in Florida as far as making the fishery a regular commercial fishery like lobster or snapper, grouper, crab. So at that time there was anybody could get in. It wasn't a closed fishery, and there's been a lot of changes in Florida, as you know, and we can talk about that if you want. But in the early days, anybody could go buy a saltwater products license, and they could go out and they could catch angelfish and do whatever they wanted with them. They could get grouper or lobster.
Even live rock then, right?
Yep, even live rock. And then as the industry started to become regulated, there was a lot of good work done by the industry and by the regulators in Florida that made it a very sustainable fishery down there. There are slot limits, meaning that there has minimum size, maximum size on fish, so the brood stock doesn't get taken, and juveniles that are too small won't be harvested, that have a minimal survivability. There's daily catch limits. There's closed fishery areas. So it's pretty well regulated. And now it's a closed fishery, meaning there's no new access to it. You can buy a current license from somebody, but you can't. There's no new licenses being created or opened up.
And is that well enforced too? Like there are patrols going around making sure people are doing the right thing?
Oh, yeah.
Wow.
I think when I lived in the Keys, we counted 9 different law enforcement agencies that had a notable presence.
Wow.
The Keys are, because there's another fairly common export from the Keys, unfish related.
You're saying that fish aren't the only contraband that comes out of the Keys?
yeah, actually, that's exactly what I'm saying. Yeah, yeah.
I never would have thought of that.
I'll tell you a quick story about that.
All right. We love stories.
This sounds like
here.
a great story.
Yeah.
Okay, so we literally had. I went down there with my roommate, and we literally had no idea what we were doing except that we were supposed to go catch fish. And we went to the hardware store or whatever. We bought little minnow nets, and we had some buckets in our boat. And this is the start of a fish collecting career. Okay?
Wow.
And we bought a used whaler, 17 whaler that was painted bright yellow. And every day we'd run out the inlet, and it would be so rough we couldn't do anything. So we'd turn around, we'd come back in, and we would dive along these mangroves along shore. And we probably did that for a month, and we couldn't catch anything. We're swimming around with our minnow net trying to catch some angelfish that didn't exist in this area. And one day we're snorkeling back to the boat after running offshore and coming back in, and this boat is zeroing down on us. And I thought it's going to run us over. And he's, put your hands up in the air. You're under arrest. You're going to jail. And we're like, what? We like lift up our little net. He brings us. We climb in the boat. He's like, look up in the air. And we look up. The DEA plane is flying around, circling us. There was over 20 different Marine Patrol, DEA, sheriff cars there searching the mangroves. They thought every day we were running out. They didn't think anybody could be this stupid. They thought we're running out. We're grabbing some other product besides fish.
Square groupers.
Yeah, and bringing it back and hide it in the mangroves to come back and get it. And it was a total cluster on their part because that was not who we were. But that was our start to a fish collecting career down in the Keys.
Great start.
And you still kept doing it.
We still kept doing it. I could not find a real job.
How long did they keep you on their boat? I mean, it must not have taken them very long to figure out.
No, they realized pretty quickly what was going on.
Right. Because I did meet a couple of guys when I was there that said they made their living finding square groupers.
I've been on the water a lot of days, but I've never found one. So
no?
If I did, I can't comment about that.
Right. So what was the transition between a 17-foot used Boston whaler and a big wholesale facility in the Midwest?
Family. Wanted to, when my first daughter was born, we moved back to Michigan and wanted to raise my children around family, and that's when we opened up the wholesale business up here.
What year was that?
That was probably 94, something.
94.
That's when I was born.
Yeah, I've been slinging water longer than you.
That's got to be a big leap of faith, though, going from collecting fish in Florida where they live to saying, all right, I'm going to sell them in Michigan where the only water we get is, frozen.
Well, it gave, being a wholesaler, with the history of being a collector, it really gave us a heads up because we could really work with all of our sources. You could look at a fish and you could tell that, hey, the net they're using is abrasion on the nose, or they're pinching the fish, or
right.
whatever. So it was really helpful with that history.
I can imagine that. Did a lot of that come from contacts you made while you were catching, or is that all stuff you had to build from the ground up?
A little bit of both. A lot of our import contacts came from when we were originally exporting. So we got to know a lot of overseas stations and exporters and importers at that time, and so it just transitioned real smoothly. But it is a big difference dealing with a fish that you're importing and you're bringing in from overseas versus one you're collecting fresh out of the ocean.
Is that facility that you started in the Keys, is that the same one you're still operating down there?
No. I kept my license current for a number of years, and I wasn't using it actively, and I let it go right on. And then that year they closed the fishery down, so it took me a number of years to be able to find somebody willing to sell another license.
Right. So right now, A&M, how many square feet?
Right now, about 12,000.
For your inland Lansing facility.
Yep.
I've been there and I didn't even realize it was that big.
For those of you in our listening audience that are in the hobbyist side of this, the privilege of being a Midwest store and having a wholesaler within driving distance is, I don't think there's anybody else like you. I mean, it's Chicago, California, New York, and Lansing, with a few really small exceptions, right?
Yeah, I like to say we're in the worst place in the world to do what we do.
I mean, we're in the best place in the world to do what we do.
We're logistically challenged, but we're also near a lot of great shops in the Midwest.
Right.
So that's an asset. I mean, we have a really good relationship with guys like you, and because there's a passion in the Midwest for the marine ornamentals and tropicals in general, it's been a great place to work. But we're logistically challenged with no major airports, closest one being Chicago, and that's on a good day 4.5 hour drive or something. So
right. Is Detroit considered a port of entry? Isn't that the fancy word for that's where you can import stuff into if it's a port of entry?
Yes, it's a U.S. Fish and Wildlife port of entry.
Okay.
Detroit is a port of entry, but it's a non-designated port of entry, which, in other words, just means you have to jump through more hoops. But
okay.
you can have an exception permit to work out of Detroit. But we don't have the flights that somebody place like L.A. or Miami or New York would have.
Right. So can you kind of explain that a little bit? There are only certain airports where it's legally okay to import fish to. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, there's. Don't quote me on this, but I think there's 26 port of entries in the U.S. For Fish and Wildlife.
Right.
That are designated port of entries where Fish and Wildlife has stations.
Okay. So basically so that they can inspect or make sure they're really monitoring what comes in.
And my understanding is if you want that exception for, if you wanted to go through Detroit, those extra hoops you're trying to arrange someone from Fish and Wildlife to be there when the shipment arrives, right?
Yeah, Detroit's going to have a staff there, but it's going to be a very small staff. Historically, they've had maybe one person. If that person's on vacation, or out of town, or is not available, you really have to book ahead of time, and you're at the whim of availability.
Okay.
And it also has limited hours. Where in Los Angeles, you could import fish 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365. You're not going to be able to do that here.
So are you saying that most of your fish come through Chicago and then get, driven over to you guys?
Well, do you want to talk pre-COVID or do you want to talk?
Well, I think we might need to get into COVID just because of how much it's changed everything, but hopefully things settle down pretty soon. I don't know.
I was looking at some numbers yesterday to kind of share with you. And I think in the Asia Pacific region right now, which is where a lot of tropicals come from, they went from roughly 7,000 flights a day, and now we're somewhere around 1,000.
Wow.
So we're at
Holy
14% of pre-COVID flight availability.
I knew it was rough. I didn't know it was that rough. I'm amazed you guys still have anything with that in mind.
Well, that's about 100% increase since last summer. There was around 500 flights last summer.
Wow.
500.
Yeah. And that's the whole theater. So.
Yeah. Well, and that means 500 flights. That doesn't necessarily mean 500 opportunities for you to ship fish.
Right.
No. I'm just saying, yeah.
That's the flight.
Got to cut down from there.
So basically, we went if we were at 100 flights pre-COVID, we went down to 7 after COVID, and now we're back up to 14. And that doesn't mean that that's what's coming to Chicago or to Detroit. That's just in that region. So it's been hugely challenging, and there's a lot of since COVID, there's a lot of other things that are being shipped by air freight. So freight rates have dramatically increased.
I'd imagine if there's a shipment of personal protection equipment, they're less likely to bump that than they are a box of fish, right?
Yeah. Yep. Rightfully so.
Yeah.
Yeah. But just adds to the difficulty.
You know, this industry is never boring.
True. I don't know. I think the collectors in Hawaii are pretty bored right now. Sorry, maybe that was a little too fresh of a joke.
Yeah.
Too soon.
I don't know where that's going to go. I know you guys are well aware of what's going on over there.
Yeah.
That fight's not over.
Okay.
I'm not going to say that it's going to return to what it was. I don't know if that ever will happen, but I will say that there's still a valid argument to be made, and that's still happening. So
I've seen a couple of, I get lists from a whole bunch of wholesalers. I only buy saltwater stuff from you, pretty much. But I've seen Hawaiian Achilles tangs show up on some of those lists. Is there like some kind of a workaround they can do for Achilles tangs? So I know when I was in Hawaii, it was surprising to see that Achilles tangs are a common food fish in Hawaii. And so you can go legally right now, collect a bucket of Achilles tangs, put them on ice, but you can't collect one and put it in a fish tank.
right, I've told my supplier that we're going to open a sushi restaurant and we need live fish. So,
Perfect.
You're just walking out of there with a live Achilles tang in your mouth, like, what?
no, it's the same thing in Florida. We have a max size on angelfish of, I think, 8 inches for like a queen angel.
Yeah.
Or a French angel. And you could go into certain seafood restaurants in Miami and you could find 14-inch breeder angels being sold for $1.50 a pound. I mean,
I knew that they ate Achilles tangs, and I've heard of some other ones. I did not know they ate angelfish in Florida.
yep.
Huh. How does one, and this is a bit of a rhetorical question, but how does one justify, how does one wrap their heads around, we're going to catch this fish and kill it and eat it, and that's okay? Okay, in a really poor country where there's not much else to eat, maybe you could justify it. Miami is not that poor country. How do you justify that and say, no, you can't put it in a fish tank and keep it alive? Yeah. Like I said, I wasn't expecting an answer for that one. Just,
I think everybody has a different value on something. I mean, you can look at a cleaner shrimp, and it's a shrimp, right? And I don't know what you retail one of those for, but you can go to Caesar's Palace and get all you can eat shrimp for $9.99 or something, right?
Yeah.
So,
Right.
I always say anything coming off the ocean is off the ocean, right? Or out of a freshwater or anything, any wild harvesting, it's harvested. So if somebody eats off of that, whether they eat it or they sell it and they buy rice or food, but and there's varying degrees of that, right? So they can either eat an Achilles or they can provide it to the hobby. But to the guy that's eating it, he's not involved in the hobby. He doesn't know anything about the hobby. I mean, you're coming at it from a different angle. Yeah. So
it's the people that are making the regulations that do, though.
They don't always look at it inclusively. They look at it as, okay, for the aquarium trade, we don't want you to do this, and because XYZ, and they don't take into account the food fishery or the.
Do you think a lot
other
of that's
uses.
just PR, though? That's to me what the whole Hawaii thing strikes me as, is it looks bad to be selling fish as pets. People don't have that same sort of perception about food fish.
Well,
is that?
I mean, if you
from?
want to have this discussion, I'm happy to have this discussion. Let me ask you another question, even deeper than that. Okay, talk to me about sport fishing.
Yeah, and that's
Ben's the fisherman here,
I am.
so I'll keep my mouth shut about sport fishing. Maybe
I think I might get some hate mail for this one because Henry Winkler did. I don't know if you saw that recently, but there was we'll frame it this way, right? Henry Winkler, the Fonz, is an avid fly fisherman, and he posted what we refer to in the industry as the grip and grin, right? Where he caught a really nice trout, and there's a picture of him. The Facebook Live people can see the look, right? Where you're holding up the fish with a big old smile on his face, and then he let the fish go, and it was catch and release. We're playing with that fish.
That fish is not playing with you,
That
right?
fish is not.
Yeah.
That fish is fighting for its life.
Right.
Yeah.
That fish is 100% sure it's
Right.
about to
It's
die.
about
Right.
to die. Right.
And I'm a fisherman, so we're just having a discussion. here,
Absolutely.
right?
Yep.
Well, and
absolutely.
Tapeta types, we're all the same.
Right.
Yes.
You know?
But if anybody wants to have a logical discussion about any of this, you can take it as far down any of these paths as you want to. And if you look at just the sport fishing industry, I mean, and catch and release, there's a guy going out and catching a marlin or a sailfish, and do you know how many of those get eaten by a shark on the way to the boat? I mean, or tarpon in Florida.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, they're reeling in heads all day long, right?
Right.
The hammerheads are eating them. So, but that's an acceptable fishery because there's a big lobbying group behind it, and there's a lot of money behind it, and there's tourism behind it,
There's senators that like to go fishing.
and they like to go fishing. But, somebody apparently decided that there's a problem with putting a fish in a tank and looking at it. So, and a lot of that is driven by money. I mean, you should do some research on who is funding the fights to stop a lot of
There's
this.
always a money trail, and it always provides some answers. You might not necessarily like those answers, but those answers are there. So when just before COVID really hit, there was like this perfect storm of regulation and banning and bad stuff happening around the hobby with Indonesia and Fiji and now Hawaii. How'd that affect you?
I go back to this industry is never boring. It changes. When I first got into this industry, the Philippines were going to shut down that year, right? Mm-hmm. And that's been a long time. So it changes, and some of it makes sense and some of it doesn't. The whole thing with Fiji doesn't make sense. The whole thing with Indonesia, maybe at the time I could argue that it made sense to a degree but not for the mariculture product, but maybe because it always comes down to somebody does something wrong, and then that gives an opportunity for somebody else to use that as a launching pad to say that the whole industry is corrupt. And that's the same thing right now that we're seeing with my dad's a retired police officer. Mm-hmm. I'm very proud of him, right? Mm-hmm. I mean, 25 years Lansing PD. I don't think my father was a bad police officer, and I don't think they should be defunding him. And I think if you're going to have a problem walking out here tonight, you're going to call a police officer. But there are a few bad apples, and also, that's what everybody looks at. And it's the same thing with fish keeping. It's the same thing with collectors. It's the same thing with fishermen. It's the same thing with politicians, right? I mean,
Yeah.
So, just to elaborate a little more, what do you think a decision like that, like what justifies an area being shut down over not being? Is it to you sustainability? Is it the ethics of like how collectors are operating? Like where should that line be drawn?
well, in those two cases, in my view, it's totally political.
Okay. Just like if it's political, what's the gain? Like, what are people trying to get out of it? That's a big question.
Yeah. Let's talk Fiji specifically.
Yeah, like because that's
right?
the details of why do these things happen and what makes it a good or bad decision.
Well, I would have to speculate.
Sure.
I'm not there.
Right.
Right. But during that time, and I'm going to be a little bit vague here. Mm-hmm. During that time, there was Fiji was in my, and this is my understanding. I could I could be off here, but this is my understanding. Fiji was going through an opportunity for some funding. And to get that funding, they had to look very environmentally friendly. Mm-hmm. So there was an argument made that we should stop this immediately for them to get that.
Easy cut to make that looks good
Yep.
and probably doesn't cost them that much money.
Right.
Have they mostly opened back up?
Fiji?
Yeah.
For coral, not at all.
Not at all.
No.
No corals out of Fiji.
No.
And do you think that's ever going to change?
I know they're still working on it, but
Okay.
I don't think it's going to change very quickly.
Has fish opened back up there?
I'm sorry, where?
Fish has that?
Fish.
Opened?
Oh, yes.
Fish is open.
Fish is open.
Is it getting back to how it used to be?
Are we talking pre-COVID?
That's the right.
Is
I
it-
get that. That's
It's a
the.
different world.
It is a different world, and I guess I gotta keep that in perspective. We
Wow.
we opened this store in this location a month before things started shutting down.
Mm-hmm.
So we get asked this question: hey, how much better is the new location? I don't know.
A lot
Right.
or not at all?
Right.
You
Yeah.
know?
Wait, are you talking pre-COVID or?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's been. You're right, and pretty much since like 2018, I think was when I think Fiji went in January and
Yeah.
Indo went in May, and we were literally at Interzoo at the time, which is a trade show in Germany, meeting with a lot of suppliers, and everything was shut down right then. And we're asking them, oh, don't worry, in another 2 weeks. I mean, that was another 2 years or something, right? So,
Everybody thought it would be like how they talked about the Philippines were about to shut down.
yeah.
Yeah.
And it's, I've dove on a lot of the sites in Bali where there's farms in the ocean, mariculture sites, and you dove on them a year afterwards, and they had quit maintaining them. I mean, you'd see an orange mani that maybe had been supposedly supposed to ship at 2 inches, and it's now 14 inches across. And they fuse together, and I mean, it's now become a reef. So a lot of people had a lot of investment in that, and a lot of businesses in that area, and a lot of people that worked in the trade just lost an opportunity. I mean, there's nowhere near the number of shippers now that there was
Right.
pre-shutdown.
What do you think those people are doing for a living today?
Probably out there poaching. I mean, if you're going to make, I think you guys have had this discussion amongst yourselves before,
Yeah.
right? You can't go to work at General Motors. You can't
Yeah.
go to work for the government. You live on an island. You're going to make your living from the sea. So, I mean,
How many Walmarts can employ 200 people within 50 miles of here?
Well, and I don't think there's a Walmart in Fiji.
Right, exactly.
yeah. No, and I'm being a little facetious when I say they're probably poaching, but I mean they're doing something else in the water, right?
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
I am told that you listen to our wild caught versus captive bred podcast.
yeah, I enjoyed it thoroughly.
Yeah.
Phew.
I'm just picturing you being like taking notes and be like, I have a few things to say about this.
Well, the one question I really had is you talked about a discussion you had with a customer, and then I never really heard what their side of the discussion was. Like, you didn't really tell me what yours was either, but I'm curious what the perception was among the public.
Oh, so this was very clearly a non-hobbyist who was walking down the street and saw fish tanks and was poking around, and they had apparently they knew someone who was keeping saltwater tanks like 15 years ago, and they were just shocked that a yellow tang was like $400 at that time. And so they asked what that was all about, and so I had to explain the whole Hawaii thing, and I made this off comment about like yeah, it just feels like some decisions are being made for political, not scientific reasons at this point. And her response was something to the effect of, well, you're from a biased position. And I had to sit there and be kind of like, I mean, you're right, but also...
Well, I think you are from a biased position in that you love yeah, I mean, you're passionate about the ocean, and fish, and the creatures, right? So, I mean, there's study after study that talks about the per pound rate of tropical fish versus the per pound rate of food fish. So, if we're going to take a fish, back to my argument again, like you want to hear it, but
you're here because we want to hear it.
Yeah, exactly.
If you're going to take a fish out of the ocean, I mean, that's like saying, okay, you got to leave the pretty people alone. You can eat all the ugly people. I mean, who's the judge of fish is a fish, right?
Yeah. So you get into a real dangerous argument when you start ranking the validity of organisms based on how pretty they are.
Exactly. But should you say a tang should stay on the ocean, but you can take a snapper out and eat it, right?
You're right. Either way, you're taking energy out of the ocean.
Yeah.
So, and that snapper is going to go for somewhere like, $12 a pound. I mean, what do you think Achilles tang goes for in the trade for per pound versus the food fish?
per pound, if it is a pound when it sells.
4 times the price of an Achilles tang to get to a pound, right?
Right?
Yeah. Figure 4 Achilles tangs are a pound.
Yeah.
So
$1,000 a pound.
$1,000 a pound.
Yeah. Pre-COVID, pre-shutdown.
They were only, I think they were $14.99 a pound in Hawaii.
Food fish.
Yeah, there was like a 5-gallon bucket, nice with just.
Okay, so $14 or $1,000. What's a better use of the resource? I mean,
right. How much more money is going into the ocean that way?
And how many people eat off that chain of custody in the live aquaria trade versus the food fish? One guy goes out and gets it and either eats that Achilles or he sells it to a seafood restaurant and somebody buys it and eats it. So 2 people, 3 people, right? Maybe. There's a collector that makes money. There's the exporter that makes money. There's the airlines that makes money. There's the bagged people that make money, the styro people that make money, Fish and Wildlife that makes money, the importer that makes money, hopefully.
This sounds a lot
probably
like
not.
you're an advocate of people having jobs.
I'm an advocate of reasonable regulations. That makes sense.
Yeah.
I mean, we only have this one environment, and the biggest. I'll give you a perfect example. We talked about Florida a little bit, right? There's a moratorium on collecting condylactis in Florida. You guys know what condylactis are, right? So they can't be collected for the trade because there's not enough of them. Going back historically years ago, every Sunday, I could go out and collect as many as I wanted it could do it any day of the week, but Sunday was the day that I did them. On this one particular flat on the Gulf side of Kajoki. And when I did that for 3 years or 4 years, every week. I didn't go to other flats. It was the only one I went to. It was easy to get to, and I got all the condies I needed to. They were reproducing. It was very sustainable. Went back to that same flat probably 3 or 4 years ago. And there's not a condylactis on it. It's because the algae is about 3 feet deep on it right now. So the condylactis didn't get over-harvested on this particular flat, causing them to go away. Ocean degradation caused the problem here, right? So
we're a tangible
but you're being blamed for it.
We're a tangible target because you can go down to the Keys and you can say, look, there's no condylactis anemones. And you could go into a big box store in Grand Rapids, Michigan and say, look, they've got condylactis anemones for sale. There's where the condylactis anemones ended up.
Yep.
Yeah, the frustrating thing to me is I feel like if there was room for us, nobody would be bigger advocates for ocean conservation than the people who have a vested interest in making sure those things are still there. Like, we want them to be there. We want to be able to see them. We want to be able to have them.
But we want to be able to show them off so other people love them too.
Exactly. Yeah. And if we're being painted as the villains, there's no room for us to do that.
Well, I'm fortunate, and I talk to a lot of store owners, and I've heard so many stories about the young person that went on to get a marine biology degree because they came into that store and they got involved in the hobby, and now they're out there doing something positive, for the environment because they were introduced. If they weren't introduced, we protect what we know and we love, right? Yeah. I mean, if we don't know about it, I mean,
how are we going to love it?
Right. growing up here in Michigan, you're not going to just accidentally wander into the reef very easily. So.
I know
Yeah.
that's a privilege that both you and I have had. We've gotten to dive on those reefs.
Yep.
You've never gotten to dive on those reefs. You got to snorkel.
Yes.
Yes. But
But I've known a couple of powder brown tangs that are named Meatball, and I'm like, all right, those guys are awesome.
yeah. So that was a lot of doom and gloom. So what's good? What's good? What's the good stuff that's coming out of this? Or what's the light at the end of the tunnel? Or
Can I have a very specific question that has absolutely no bearing on anything ever?
sure.
What's a fish that like every time you get it in, you're like, wow, I've seen like a million of these, and I'm still like, this is the greatest thing ever.
Queen angelfish.
Every time.
Still a favorite, huh?
It's hard to argue against that one.
Yeah, it's a beautiful fish.
Yeah.
And they change and they morph from juveniles to the medium size, subadult, and the adult, and they're different from different regions. Like the fish from Brazil are different than the ones from, the Florida or northern Caribbean, and it's just a beautiful fish.
I love fish that go through that like a juvenile phase, just because it's like you get one fish, but you get quote unquote multiple looks throughout its life cycle, and it's like, yeah, for the price of one fish, you get multiple fish.
Right.
I have a somewhat related question. What's the holy grail fish? That's a question we like to ask. Is there one out there that you're like, even if it's one you haven't been able to get for years but have had before, what's the one you're looking for?
There's a butterfly called the Banks butterfly.
Okay, I need to look it up.
It's a deep water Caribbean fish, and we used to catch it years ago, and I've not seen any of those in the hobby since we caught them.
So like, you're saying you yourself caught them. Mm-hmm. That's actually really cool.
That's gorgeous.
Solid choice.
Yeah. So
That's
did
one
you
I've
do
only seen in pictures.
deep water collecting
Deep
out
water,
there?
yeah, 220, 225.
Wow.
Wow. So how does that work?
You
What do
just
you
have
have
to
to
be
do?
stupid and dumb and young. Okay?
Okay, so now I
I'm
need
not
to hear
going
about
after
it.
them anymore.
That's a young man's
Yeah.
venture.
Are you
Yeah.
willing to share the stupid dumb methods you did, or you want to leave that behind you?
We'll leave that behind.
Fair enough. That's a sweet fish.
Now, there's a lot of I've had a lot of great opportunities. I've collected fish in Florida and Bahamas and Belize and Brazil and Philippines and Indonesia, and I've had a lot of great dives and worked with a lot of great people. And it's something that I kind of tried to instill in my kids is that find something you love and you will never work a day in your life. And I'm very, very fortunate to do that. And it's not been an easy path by any means, but I enjoy it. And we're still doing it, and I'll probably be doing it for a while, especially in post-COVID.
Are the kids in the business?
Pardon?
Are the kids in the business?
No. But my daughters are Alyssa and Mari, and that's where A&M comes from.
Aw.
So
Wait, I gotta cross it off my list. That was one of my questions.
Yes, that's great. I didn't know that.
Yeah. I did not want my kids in this business. I wanted them
But Bill,
to.
it pays so well.
Yeah. So Alyssa just graduated from MSU vet school. She's starting a vet career here soon.
Fantastic.
Great.
And Mari is self-employed, works with primarily women entrepreneurs and social media marketing
Wow.
and that type of brand imaging.
Sounds like you did well.
They're off my dole, okay?
So sounds like you did really well.
Mostly.
So how do you determine who is worth buying from?
We're a little bit different than a lot of our competitors, and a lot of this goes back to having kind of a passion for what we do, and I'm not saying others don't, but I'm truly grateful for being able to work with in this industry, and I want to do the best job I can for the livestock that we're fortunate enough to bring through. So we don't shop price. We look for suppliers who we feel are doing things with the highest ethical standards. And most of them we travel, we develop personal relationships with, we get to know them, we meet their employees, we watch them pack, we watch them sort fish, and we get a real good working relationship with them, and we know who we want to work with from that. Anytime we're bringing on somebody new, I have a pretty good network of in the industry throughout the world, whether it's Japan or Hong Kong or Europe, and I'm often, if I'm looking for a new supplier in a certain region, I can often touch base with somebody that I know has similar values, and they can kind of point me in the right direction if they're willing to do so. But the best way, and I tell this to store owners all the time, you really need to get out and travel. I mean, you should go see. Even if you don't do business with a wholesaler, you should go meet them and get to know them and see their shop and see what they do. And you'll either have a good appreciation for them, or you'll know that you don't want to. And you can't buy fish based on a fax list or an email stock list, or somebody calling you up and telling you they got the super the super parrot yellow. So it's and I think stores should. Some of the most successful stores I see, have a good relationship with other store owners and other store managers, and they get out and they visit each other and they help each other. And if somebody's having a problem with something, they advise them and they work together. We're all in this thing. We're all trying to make a living at something, and it's a small niche, really, and it's amazing. We'll see people that we haven't seen for years, and then they come back around. They come back around. So get out and travel. You'll meet if you can go into another store and get one idea, or if a hobbyist can meet another hobbyist and get one idea about how to improve their own tank or their own setup or something, then it was worth that trip, right?
So we have a YouTube channel. When are you going to let us film your facility? Put you on the hot seat there.
I don't know. We'd have to wash it. No.
Honestly, that's a pretty fair assumption, by the way.
Yeah.
You should have seen me cleaning up here last week, though.
We've done tours, a lot of tours. We've had several clubs through there, and we've had different schools, Eastern Michigan, MSU, different. Right now in post-COVID, we've been closed.
Fair.
I don't know when we're going to reopen, and it's only because we have now limited staff and everybody's working ridiculous hours with the airlines and things. So I hope to open back up again for walk-ins here in the future at some point, and at that point, I'd be willing to be more than happy to have you guys come down and do that.
So how do you vet a store? Or let's say somebody calls up and says, "Hey, I want to buy wholesale from you."
It's a big challenge and a big waste of. I shouldn't say it's a waste of time, but it takes a lot of our time. We really try to only deal with brick and mortar, and you got Google searches, and you can look at somebody and find out if they're. Pretty easily find out if they're working out of a residence. You can't always find out if they have an address that's another, in a commercial location or whatever. I mean, we'll have a guy that owns a pizza shop, and he says he's, that means he has a tank in his pizza shop, right?
Yeah.
So, but we're the best way for us, because we know who our preferred customer is, and he's a business that is hands-on by the owner or a manager that's been there a long time. And they're primarily an aquatics store versus a full-line shop. There are exceptions to that, of course. But we look at who they buy fish from now, because we can, if they tell us who their primary vendors are, then we know that we're not even in the ballpark. You don't want to buy fish from us, right?
There's this place out of Chicago we buy from.
Yeah. If you, by who they're buying fish from, you can tell whether their shopping price or their shopping quality.
Right.
So.
We definitely have had it. I think I can think of 2 or 3 different times where I've had customers come into the shop and ask where we get our fish from. And I'm pretty close-lipped mostly about where our fish come from. Although this is kind of letting the cat out of the bag tonight. But, it's West Michigan. Everybody buys from you. So
We'd be
We're okay
crazy
with
to
that.
buy anywhere else.
exactly.
Yeah.
We're okay with that. But I've definitely had it where I had a customer says, and if you tell me that you get your fish from A&M, I'm not buying anything from you because those guys are jerks. And what come to find out what that would be is a retail customer who had a big fish tank and thought he could throw his weight around because he was a VP at a big, huge grocery store chain and buy from you.
I'm not saying they don't get through, but we really do try to monitor that.
Yeah.
I mean, what we look at is to grow this hobby, you've got to be selling glass, right? Otherwise, you're just stealing business from somebody that's working hard to try to sell glass. So if you're working out of your, and I started in a garage, okay, right? So I'm not knocking that, but you've got to be contributing to the industry to grow it. And if you're not selling tanks, you're not growing the hobby.
I actually had a customer in last week where they asked me where a lot of our saltwater fish came from, and my genuine response was, I mean, A&M, but anyone in West Michigan would be dumb not to.
Yeah.
You guys are too kind.
It's not just because of shipping, but that certainly helps.
Yeah, and it's the delivery guy.
That's right. He's a good-looking guy. How far is your reach?
Pre-COVID. So we deliver West Michigan, and we've got we deliver basically Toledo to Flint market. We're going down as far as Indy, and we go into Chicago every week. And we used to run as far as Dayton. So we basically the Midwest. We ran routes. Michigan, Indiana, Ohio, and into Chicago. That's kind of a catch-22. I mean, it's great for the relationship with the stores, but none of my competitors get in a van and drive around and deliver fish, right?
Right.
Right.
There's a couple exceptions. We mentioned some people in Chicago, but they're not delivering exclusively saltwater fish.
Right.
We drive past a lot of stores that are selling, freshwater or corporate stores that somebody else might be delivering to, just to get to the handful of independents that are. So it's a costly venture, but it gives us I think a better product to get to everybody, and so everybody that does do it loves it. Shipping wise, we ship all over the country, but then again, it's a select group of buyers that are more concerned about the product that they're getting and less concerned. Everybody looks at the cost, right? We always look at cost, but I mean, what they have to look at is whether the shipments are profitable. And A&M is the only livestock exporter, wholesaler, whatever we are today, that I'm aware of. Everybody says we have great quality. We've got, best fish, blah, blah, blah. You can go right on our website and it'll tell you our annual DOA rate is less than 1%. Our fill rates average 97%. We quantify it. So I haven't seen anybody else in the industry quantify what they're doing. So.
10% cheaper doesn't mean much if you lose half of them.
Right.
Yeah. A good deal on a dead fish isn't a good deal.
No, it's not good for the fish, and it's not good for you.
That's not good for the industry as a whole.
No.
Yeah. Just,
We're in the business of, keeping fish alive to the best of our abilities.
Yeah. It's an interesting statement, though, when you get a certain segment of people that come in the store and either A, look at it like, well, Charles had a conversation with somebody the other day on the phone with Dragonette. And we have kind of backed off on dragonets because we can't get them through quarantine properly. And this person said to Charles, well, I don't mind it if you get me one and I try it. I mean, they're not an expensive fish. So even if we got to try a couple to get one that works. And I tried really hard to not get angry and punch things because that to me is that's the attitude right there. And just so you know, we are still working out to try to come up with a different way to get them through the quarantine process. And we're still working on it. But for now, you've probably noticed we haven't bought a dragonet from you in about a year or two until we figure that out. But that attitude is so hard to get past that it's, well, if you lose a couple, that's fine.
Yeah, it comes down to education. I mean, that's, and you guys, I have to give you guys kudos because what you guys are trying to do is really cool.
Thank you.
There are varying degrees of it out there, but you guys are really taking it to another level with your quarantines, and I think that's fantastic. And I hope that it is successful and continues to be, and you figure it out. So, but you guys are the front line, right? I mean, our job is to go out and kind of try to find the best source of the product, and to do the best job we can getting it here at the best price and hold it the best we can and present it to you. Your job is to deal with the public and educate them, and you're doing that with your talks and when you get everybody in the store. And I mean, there's a reason why you're doing what you're doing, and you're selling a value to that consumer, and they've got to realize it. And you're not going to get through to all of them. Some will, some won't. So what? I mean, it's but you've probably educated a lot of people. I mean,
we're trying. We did the math too. We quantified it a little bit, and we're at I think we're at about a 92% success rate right now with getting them through that 4-week quarantine process. We did. We actually had some guests on our show, or technically we were guests on their show a few months ago. The Fish Guys. Mm-hmm. They do podcast, and one of those guys is a wholesaler, and I didn't figure out where he's a wholesaler. And one of the other ones is a retailer, and they were talking about their industry standard is 60%. And so I kind of just roughly looked at how much we spent on fish and looked at the difference between 60% and 92% and cost. And of course, we put a tremendous amount more cost into those fish, keeping them for 4 weeks, paying this guy to monitor copper levels
right.
and medicating food and all that kind of stuff. And the math works. Like that, we're not making more money on those fish because they're costing us more. But they're not costing us any more. We're just not killing as many fish. So the math works.
Yeah.
That's
Spending
awesome.
money on manpower instead of deaths.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, exactly.
We were actually celebrating today because the shipment I brought out of quarantine today had a 100% survival rate.
Yep, 100%.
Fantastic. That's awesome. Congratulations. That's really cool.
Yeah, and they were not like basic bread and butter stuff either. It was possum wrasses and yes, all from you.
Yeah, actually.
That batch of possum wrasses are amazing. They're the best ones I've ever seen. They're so cute.
I hate to ask this question, but what is the 60%? What are they saying?
They are saying that if they manage to sell 60% of their fish before they die, that's acceptable shrinkage is what they shrinkage.
Yeah.
That counts as an acceptable level of shrinkage.
So we've talked a lot about collecting, but you're a wholesaler now. I feel like we should poke a little bit more at that specifically. How long do you keep fish?
How long do we keep fish? Typically, our average day on hand is about 7 to 10 days. Mm-hmm. I mean, there's probably fish in that facility that have been here for 6 months, and there's some that will move within 2 days. I mean, but typically we bring in fish during the week, and they're in a 24-hour quarantine, or acclimation rather, and then they go through a dip process, either freshwater or formaldehyde, depending on the fish. Every fish today's coming in with flukes on them. We treat for that, and then they go into the system, and then they go into inventory on Friday. So then they would start shipping the following week. So we tend to hold fish way longer than most of my competitors, and a lot of that is because it's a better job. But we were kind of forced into that from our logistics as well. So that's kind of going back to where our location. It's kind of forced us to do a better job. We pay more for freight than they do. We may pay the same in fish price, net fish price overseas, but typically it's going to cost more to ship it from into Chicago or to Detroit. So we've got more cost up front. We've got limited days with the port of entry. So we tend to really do a longer hold. And with marines, I don't know about freshwater, I can't really comment there, but with marines, if you're going to take and bring those fish in, your biggest problem is about the third day usually. I always equate it when somebody asks me why is it? It's like, have you ever traveled overseas? I mean, have you been on a plane for 24 hours and then you get off and then you get on another plane for the next day? I mean, your immune system is compromised. You're in a rough position. That's the same thing for these guys. When they come in, anybody that brings them in, this is my opinion again, and maybe.
That's why you're here.
Okay.
Whoa, guys.
but these guys in LA that bring in fish in on Sunday and start shipping them on Monday are not doing anybody any favors. I would challenge any of my competitors to hold their fish for 1 week out there, to dip them, to treat them, and they would have a better product. None of them are going to do that. But
we would challenge any of our competitors to hold their fish longer too.
Yeah. So it's.
Yeah, we've all proven that you can, guys.
It's
so
a better product.
Yep.
It's better for the fish. And when you fly back from Indonesia, the first thing you're going to do is rest for a couple of days, right? So,
yeah, something we rail against a lot here is don't just keep passing things down the line. Fix them when they're here. Don't pass it down to the people who are putting it in their tanks and don't know better.
Right.
Right.
It's got the best chance with us up front to get a little healthier. But if we pass it to you and it's not healthy, then you've got a compounded problem, and then they've got a compounded problem.
I think that is the model that works. The standard in the hobby right now does seem to be shifting, and this is a good shift. To hobbyists, a lot more hobbyists are setting up quarantine tanks than they used to, and I think that's a good shift. But I don't think that's the sustainable best shift, because there's too much education that has to happen to properly quarantine a fish. And if we have, some father-daughter project of setting up a saltwater tank with a couple of Nemo fish, they're not going to know anything about quarantine. They're going to walk into a store and not knowingly, I'm just going to buy these fish and put them together just like we did with that goldfish for Timmy. And that shouldn't be where that responsibility lies. That responsibility should lie with you guys getting them to us quickly as healthy as possible and us quarantining them. Then we know that fish, we educate it. Or we can educate the public and make sure that it's healthy, so that when they do bring those clownfish home that they know absolutely nothing about, they're at least starting from a good place.
Yeah.
For sure.
I think my favorite thing about quarantine, for me personally, is that I get to know that fish as an individual before I try to sell it to someone.
Yeah.
I have a very specific story where I had two customers in the store at the same time. They both wanted Tamini tanks, and I told one, you want this one because your tank is full of jerks. And this fish will stand up to him. Mm-hmm. You want this one because this one's a pansy.
Yeah.
And your fish is full of calm fish.
It's amazing, right? Two of the same fish and different personalities.
Yeah.
Completely different organisms at that point.
And making sure those people who want Nemo don't take Dory too.
Yeah.
Well, as long as they're not taking the turtle and the
Yeah. The giant sea star.
Right. It's a challenge. I know that you guys are dealing on the front of it, and I don't know what the answer is. I think the more that you can educate the consumer and the more the consumer gets involved, the better off everybody is. And I think the internet and a lot of businesses have done a fantastic job with providing information. I mean, unfortunately, we don't really sell books anymore. It's just right.
We had an entire podcast. We had 3 podcasts on that.
Yeah.
There's still a lot of good information in books, but everybody is so looking for immediate gratification, and that's what your customer probably wants to take that fish home today and set it up today, and and you can't really do that with this, especially with reef tanks. And you introduce something, and you got a problem in a reef tank that you can't treat.
You'd be amazed at how many we can get, though. That's the inspiring part of it, is more people walk out of here happy, even if they're walking out with nothing, just because we're willing to talk to them. So,
You've got to be willing to not sell them something, right?
Yeah.
Exactly.
Right.
Exactly.
I remember, I think it was you. I listened to a conversation where your exact words at one point were, "I'm asking you not to give me money today."
Yeah. Yeah, I have made that statement on more than one occasion. Yeah.
So where do you guys see the hobby going from a tank perspective?
Short-term nanotanks are like this crazy rage right now.
yeah.
Everybody's going for that let's get these crazy mind-blowing colors and corals and nanofish.
It was really notable to me. So I'm going to talk about our performance in the podcast a little bit. Our saltwater podcasts normally perform about half as well as our freshwater ones.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
We did 2 different nano-themed saltwater ones, and they performed as well as our freshwater ones. And that completely blew my mind.
Yeah, if not a little bit better. That's the avenue that freshwater hobbyists take to get into saltwater without dropping $3,000 on a new setup. So...
Does that nano originally when the nanos came out, it was like that was going to be like the gateway drug. But everybody stays with the nano, right? They don't go into a bigger tank.
I know a lot of people that definitely went bigger.
Yeah.
A lot of people definitely use it as to dip their toe in. I will say I think the majority stay small, but there's definitely a subset that oh man, I really like this. I wish I'd gone bigger. And then a year later, they're setting up a 75, a 120, a 180 because they want tanks and they can't do that. And
2 years ago, I would regularly say that fish tanks are like boats. Everybody wants a bigger one, right? But I don't think that I would say that anymore. And I think that I would have even said 2 years ago that anybody who buys a nano tank in 2 years is either buying another tank or selling everything they have. But the small tanks, and maybe it's the availability of small fish that are helping with that. And the cost of big fish.
And more accessible small pumps, better small filters, better chemical filtration, better technology in LEDs. Putting a metal halide on a 20-gallon tank is crazy. So it's all stuff that is improved.
Yeah.
Yeah, we have seen the industry shift as a wholesaler from angelfish, triggerfish, groupers,
right.
to everything's got to be reef safe. If it's not a reef safe fish or a small, it's that's where the market's at. And cost right now. I mean, we haven't really talked on that, but I do want to talk for 1 second about cost because,
please,
especially in this post-COVID times, I know a lot of people are frustrated with what everything costs. And
who thought Potter Browns would be the cheap tank?
Yeah, who thought a yellow tank would be $400? But if you could get one. But we talked earlier about the flights a little bit, and I told you guys about that. But what I didn't tell you is that our freight rates have gone up almost 300%, probably.
Whew.
Wow.
So pre-COVID, if a fish cost us $1, for every $1 that we had in fish cost, actual fish cost, we probably had another $4.50 in freight, customs clearance, fish and wildlife charges, ground transportation, packing charges, etc.
Wow.
So at fish that cost $1 actually costs $5.50. Today, that fish that may cost $1 now costs about $14.50 in cost. So the fish went from $5 to $15, right, in cost.
Yeah.
So that's why, I mean, I don't understand how any business that cannot be super focused on the quality of their product, because if we lose $1 of a fish cost, we still lose $15 in freight that we're never going to get back or whatever, right? So it's so upside down right now.
Hopefully, the silver lining to that will be care.
Hopefully.
I don't know if that's going to be or not, but the focus on, I mean, we used to joke that a cheap saltwater fish was $30, and now I think a cheap saltwater fish is $60. And if you're dropping $60 a fish, that's all of a sudden not just like, that's not, I'm going to just drop that on a whim kind of money.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe that's going to start making people care.
Yeah, and if we all slow down a little bit, it's probably not a super bad thing. I mean,
yeah. So when you look around at other stores, how many other stores are doing things like paying that kind of attention to quarantine? I know that we are somewhat unique in the fact that we do that full 4-week quarantine process, but other stores do some stuff. And I know a couple of other stores that do a pretty substantial quarantine process. How many of them out there are doing it?
Well, I can answer it this way. Of the stores that we deal with, probably a more larger percentage of the stores that we deal with are doing it than in the industry as a whole.
I get it. Yeah.
So I'm saying that the buyer that wants to buy from us is probably a better store.
Yeah.
But no, they're all doing a varying degree of it, right? Some have a quarantine room in the back room. Some bring it in and hold it for a little bit, maybe 3 days or 5 days. Some have a certain protocol. I think you guys probably have the most aggressive protocols that I'm aware of.
Okay.
Aggressive, obsessive,
I'm not saying that in a bad way at all.
No, we will readily admit that.
Yeah.
Yeah, you're striving for the highest quality product you can is an obsession, right? So
it is. Yeah, it is. And sometimes people get it and sometimes don't.
Yeah.
But we still manage to do it with having what I think are fairly competitive prices out there. It's not like we're charging way more for a coral beauty than I think you can get down the street.
Well, like you said, that your cost is there, whether it's dead fish in the tank or the labor, right?
Yeah.
It's the same cost. So.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And so cost, how long do you think now, okay, what do you think has the biggest effect on that cost? I mean, I know it's shipping, right? We know that shipping is that cost, but why did it get so expensive? It's
just supply and demand. I mean, when there's 15% of the space that everybody needs, people are paying more for it. They're bidding up the cost of the freight every week. So some people are willing to pay it, some aren't, but it's eBay on the airlines or whatever, right? So
is it a bidding system?
To some degree, yeah.
Okay.
You can kind of lock it in for different airlines. You can lock it in for a month or whatever, but yeah.
But they're gonna that price you paid this month might be completely different.
Be completely different next month.
Sheesh.
Yep. And we have not seen it go down. You would think that here we are a year later or something.
Yeah.
But I can tell you, fuel surcharges were something that we never had 20 years ago. Then we had the high gas prices. I don't know, whatever it was, 2008 or something. The airlines instituted fuel surcharges, and the fuel surcharges almost became as much as the freight charge. And when gas prices went back down, fuel surcharges never went away.
Right. Oh, people are willing to pay this.
Right.
Let's keep charging it.
So I don't foresee maybe it's someday when the airlines are struggling to fill their space, but
right.
You can't exactly say, no, I won't do it through an airline. You know, it's got to come from somewhere.
Well, I think we should knock somebody else for 1 minute here, okay?
Sure.
I want to knock FedEx and UPS. They are pirates. And if my rep is listening to this, I will tell him to his face. But, I mean, for over a year, they have had none of their reps on the road. Their reps have been working out of the house.
Yeah.
They have not guaranteed on-time delivery.
No.
And they have not given any, well, with not guaranteeing on-time delivery, something you're paying a priority freight for could show up 2 days later, and you're still paying priority freight for it.
And it could all be dead by 2 days later. And it could all be dead.
Right.
You know, so not only in the last year have we had the challenges of getting fish to us, but getting fish to the store has been incredibly frustrating. And domestic carriers are limited, right? There's not. We have more U.S. flights now than we have. I think we're up to, I don't know, 50 to 70% something of what we were pre-COVID, maybe. But flights, airplanes are smaller. The load is less.
Less
So
room for cargo.
yeah.
Yeah.
But a lot of fish are shipped on FedEx, and it's been a big challenge for shippers and customers and the consumer. And so I just wanted to, I had to put that in there because we're talking about airlines.
Yeah, what a time.
Yeah, we've had some fish shipments that weren't quite on time.
Yeah.
Well, you have a platform. Is there anything else you need to let the world know?
You have any rants for us?
Yeah, I want to ask you guys a couple things about freshwater, if I could.
Yeah.
So, overall, what's the biggest difference from an operational standpoint, freshwater versus saltwater for you?
We only do a 2-week quarantine on freshwater.
Yeah.
We have a cheat for that, though.
Yeah. Yeah. All of our freshwater tanks are individual, so we can isolate. So it's not like we're bringing in, with a saltwater shipment, we put that whole shipment into one single quarantine system and keep that whole shipment in that system for 4 weeks. With freshwater, the panda cory cats go in one tank, and the neon tetras going in another tank, and the apisto cichlids go in another tank. And so if we have, in 2 weeks, we can tell if there's a problem or not. In 3 days, usually, a problem is going to manifest itself.
So once they went through your 2-week quarantine, do they then get introduced to the old inventory of the same species, or do you try to keep that separate? Or
No, they'll go back up with the once they go up on the sales floor, they'll go into whatever tank we've got room for them.
Okay.
Yep.
So you guys briefly mentioned, I think you mentioned it in the talk that I listened to, was MAC, right?
Uh-huh.
So do they have an understanding of what that organization really was? You kind of
I don't know. We
Sort of.
talked about it a little bit. So this is the Marine Aquarium Council, and the Marine Aquarium Council are they still in existence?
No.
They're completely dissolved now.
Yeah.
Okay. So it was a kind of a grassroots organization. It was kind of brought out by the industry itself to kind of, I don't want to say self-police, but self-regulate. And there was the MAC certification program, which I actually was interviewing to be a MAC certifier back 15 years ago, something like that. And so what they would do is have this rigorous tracking protocol for every fish. And so the goal was that a MAC certified powder brown tang, you could scan a serial number here in the store, and it would give you everything, like who collected that fish and every point
Wow.
that fish went through.
And this is like 10 or 15 years ago, right?
Up until 8 years ago.
Okay.
You guys were one of the only MAC certified wholesalers.
We have the distinction of having the import 001. We're the first importer in the world to be MAC certified. And just to expand upon what you were mentioning, when you talk about sustainable fishery, MAC went out and did reef track surveys at the collection site. So they would take and know that that site was sustainable. Then they would work with the collector. He had to be totally net trained and verified, and the way he was collecting them and handling them, and mortality along the whole chain of custody. Then with the exporter in the source country had to be certified, the importer, and then the retailer. And it was a really ahead of its time type program. It was founded. It was founded by grants primarily, and I think it existed for like 7 or 8 years. And it was supposed to then become self-funding, and the industry never could generate enough revenue from the products that were in sale at the time. And I kind of think if you guys were in that position today, maybe it would be a little more successful, because what you guys are doing with trying to educate the consumer about the whole quarantine process and why things are, that's what was really needed at that time. But people would respond to, well, I can pay $12 across town for that, or I can pay 16 to you for the Mac. I don't care, right? So
yeah.
Well, not to mention tracking. Every fish that we get becomes a data point in our system. We know when we got it. We know oftentimes even what end customer it goes to.
That's awesome.
And I don't know if that type of like tech and just the ability to monitor over the internet, that kind of stuff was available at that time.
No, it's definitely has progressed significantly.
Yeah.
So, but it was a fantastic program, and there's a lot of sustainable fishery models out there, and that was one that was kind of ahead of its time. So, I would like to see we talked about some doom and gloom, but there's been a lot of good things in the industry, and there's a lot of positive things, and I think that I'm optimistic. You know what I mean? So.
Yeah, I think that we are too.
I've been here for 5 years now.
5 years.
Yeah. Even in that time, like the awareness of the average consumer of what goes on both out in the ocean and like all the way to their tanks has skyrocketed. Like knowing what disease is and how it gets into a tank, that's pretty new to most people, but most reefers now are aware of it, I think.
Yeah, I have had very distinct conversations with Amy about. So I took over our quarantine here about a year ago.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I'm thankful I did when I did, because I can look back at the previous people who ran quarantine and see the way that people were kind of like, oh, okay, that's what you do. And I don't think I could last long term in an environment where like I'm spending X amount of my time doing this to try and produce a better product. And like 3 years ago, no one cared.
Yeah, for people who are just saying, but why though? And you're like, for all of these reasons. And that awareness has gone a lot up.
Yeah.
That's fantastic. That's awesome. That's good to hear.
We had a lot of debates about whether or not we would be public about how we do it. And we decided yes. We actually did a podcast where we go through step-by-step instructions. If another store wants to know exactly how we go through the quarantine process, we'll share it.
And at what scale?
At what scale?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think that's the important detail.
Yeah.
And it's easy to put that information out there because not everybody's going to do the work, right? So
Exactly.
It's like, okay, do it. Hire a Charles.
Yeah.
Have that be his whole job.
Yeah.
It's a hard sell.
I mean, what we do at A&M is not rocket science, right? I mean, anybody could pretty much do it. They just are not going to maybe do it.
Yep.
So
Okay, so I got you. One of the things you talked about was treating for flukes. What do you do for flukes?
freshwater or formaldehyde.
Okay.
It's dips.
Yeah.
That was one of the big hurdles for us.
It was. It was. At one point, I think we had flukes in every one of our tanks.
Or praziquantel is the other.
Yeah.
So we did prazi, and then we learned that there is a bacteria that eats praziquantel.
And if it's in a long-term system where you're dosing prazi consistently, it'll get established.
We use it as a dip.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We our solution is we run hypo,
Yep.
and I don't know, it works.
So over the 4-week process, they start out at the salinity you bring them to us. I would think is 1.021.
Thanks, by the way.
Yep.
You liked it better at 17 or 19 or something?
No, we like it at 21.
Okay.
Yeah. And then over the course of 5 days, 4 days, 5 days.
Well, because I'm gone Thursday and Friday, it's over the course of like 5-6 days.
Okay. Bring it down to 1.010,
Mm-hmm.
adjusting copper levels the whole time.
And pH.
Yeah. And then bring it back up over the course of another 4 or 5 days.
Yeah.
So it only stays down there for...
It's down for 10 days.
Oh, down for 10 days.
Yep.
And then back up for 5 days.
Yeah. So, and a little break there, you mentioned something about late night cigar and beer discussions with people looking into MAC certification and running about getting that going again. How many other wholesalers are out there that were really behind it?
I tend to be careful how I answer this. I would tend to say that there is a very limited, less than one hand count of what I'm gonna call people that are like mind to myself
That's what I was
within the
thinking.
industry.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
I think it's a fair assessment.
Yeah.
It's the same tightrope we have to walk when we're talking about other stores.
Yep.
It's like, it's not pointing fingers, but we still have to move somewhere. Yeah.
there's a lot of things that the industry could be doing better as far as messaging, but it's very fragmented. We're mostly all at a wholesale level. Everybody's competitive, right? You know, I might be great friends with somebody, but he's also my competitor. So, you know, and there's only so many good shops, and unfortunately, there's more supply than there is demand sometimes. So we just kind of focus on what we do, and we do it the best we can, and it sorts out.
Yeah.
But if you want to take and get that messaging uniform, and you want to have good funding, and you want to support groups like PJAC, and you want to support the fight in Hawaii, then you need everybody on board. And unfortunately, not everybody's on board.
True.
Oh, the information is readily available to any hobbyist or to any store owner who's involved in the good fight. You know, so you can source that. You can if you're looking to I'm not naive enough to know that A&M is your only supplier, or think that we are, right? So I would just say that you should be doing your due diligence to find out if all of your suppliers are in the good fight, or if they're just better marketers, you know. So
Well said.
Yes. We try really hard to do that.
yeah.
I don't know that they all are, but I think they are. One of these days, I know we need to, and you know, we need to put our quarantine system to the test, and we're gonna do just one shipment from one of those other places, just to see, does this quarantine process really work that well? Because I know that when we're getting something from you, it's better. It's a better product.
Yeah. Does our quarantine only work because we're working with you?
Yeah.
But I hope so. No, but no, I'm just kidding. But that's only, you know, one part of your qualifying of a vendor, right? I mean, he's also got to be. He could have good fish. That doesn't mean he obtained them ethically. Doesn't mean he's necessarily supporting the industry. Doesn't mean that he's
Absolutely.
You know.
Right.
So.
Yeah.
That's why I'm saying I just want to try it once. I'm not
Right.
I'm not saying I want to, try another wholesaler out there just so that we can see if we can get different fish. But
No, you should. That's how you're going to find out
how good is our quarantine process?
Yeah.
Especially if we're gonna say other people should do it.
Right.
Yeah. I did 8 years ago. I went and visited a couple of the big ones out in LA. And based on that visit, based on the tours I was given, one of those wholesalers I stopped buying from after I saw their facility. And they were definitely one of the big ones. We won't go into it all who that was, but
When we're done recording, we can talk about it.
yeah, absolutely.
Give me 2 guesses.
But it was
It's either one or the other.
kind of is that way out in LA right now. There's a few others out there, but not many. But yeah, it was notable that it wasn't just that when I saw their facility, it was not as well kept. That was part of it.
Mm-hmm.
But the attitude of the people that were in there just were not, you said it well, like-minded. Yeah.
Well, we're fortunate here in the Midwest to another degree. We've got Michigan State here, and Michigan State's got a great zoology program, and we tend to take a lot of graduates from MSU. And
we've got one or two.
We got a few.
Maybe one in the studio audience.
Awesome.
Lucky us.
Yeah.
Some of them find out that, zoology doesn't pay as well as insurance,
right?
Or something. But some of them stick, and so we're finding people that have an interest in what they're doing, right off the bat. So that's been a great resource for us, and we do internships with them. We've even had one internship at the Coral Farm down in Florida, cool. So it's cool.
That's cool.
So we talked a lot about fish. We didn't talk much about coral. We should talk coral. Coral
Charles walks out of the room.
Allie steps up to the microphone. Coral has an interesting, different aspect of its importation because it has to be CITES certified, right?
Yep.
Do you guys have to deal with that?
Of course, yeah.
What's the process?
Depends on the source country.
Okay.
But typically the permits are applied for by the exporter.
Okay.
In the name of the exporter and the name of the importer. The permits are specific for species and quantity, a number of species of each, and there's expiration dates and costs associated with all those, and everything that we import coral-wise is CITES listed. Then it's kind of an interesting thing that you mentioned CITES, because a lot of hobbyists assume that they don't have to worry about these type things, right?
Yeah.
But this is another reason why you as a shop owner and even a hobbyist should really be concerned about where they're sourcing their products, because you need to do a little Google research on the Lacey Act.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
So you've heard of it.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
Anybody, any, and it has to do with wildlife, right? Protection of wildlife, and any illegal act at any point in the chain of the custody basically makes the whole chain of custody responsible for that. So if you bought a fish from us that was caught with cyanide, technically you could be held accountable for that, right? So that's why we're doing the best thing. We have to really be vigilant as to who we're buying fish from, how they're collected, and you should be vigilant. But let's take that one step further. When you talk about coral, if coral were to become ESA listed, that just because you're raising it in your tank, it's not a domestic animal. It's wildlife. You can't transport it interstate. You can't sell it interstate. So basically, if everybody would pretty much be shut down, hobbyist wise, frag swap wise, everything.
Yeah.
All that stuff is done.
That's like the whole coral industry, basically, is
Okay, wait a minute.
shipping stuff
We need
around.
to back up here a little. We've got a few too many acronyms out there.
Okay.
CITES, the Commission for the International Trade of Endangered Species.
Right.
Right. What's ESA?
Endangered species list.
Okay. And so, is it the case that if Joe Reefer has a CITES certified brain coral in his tank, and he sells that to Mary, who's in a different state. Is that technically not legal?
Technically, now it is legal.
That is legal.
But okay, let's go back just a few years ago. There was a push by a environmental group. There's always pushes coming out to try to post something on the endangered species list. This was for Percula clownfish.
Oh, I remember
yeah.
this.
Okay, it didn't pass. But if that had gone on the endangered species list, all the Perculas that are being bred in captivity, everything, are now on the endangered species list. Just because they're in captivity doesn't mean that they're not cows, they're not dogs, they're not domesticated animals. It's wildlife from a technical standpoint. So, I think you guys have talked on your podcast that I've listened to before about freshwater, which I thought was interesting, where there's certain species that are no longer available in the wild, but is still in the trade, right? So I'm assuming they're not listed as endangered.
No.
The red-tailed shark is not listed as an endangered species.
They are not listed on the Endangered Species Act specifically.
Okay.
They're like IUCN listed, but not ESA listed.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay.
So now if they were, though, then that shuts down the trade of that. And
Yeah. Arapamas are.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then they would be gone forever.
right. So
Yeah.
once you take away that financial motive of being able to save it, who's going to sit there and try to save that animal forever?
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
So that's just something I wanted to kind of clarify for you guys' purpose and for the hobbyists is that just because you guys aren't necessarily doing an importation or dealing with the Fish and Wildlife or the laws doesn't mean that you guys, if you're handling this type of livestock, you're ultimately responsible for it. And
Yes. And even if we obtained it through quote unquote legal sources, if somebody along that supply chain didn't file their paperwork properly. And it's not just us then that are liable, right? If we sell that back to Joe Reefer could be held criminally responsible as well.
Technically. Yep.
Yeah.
I've never seen it happen, but technically, yeah.
Yeah. It falls under the category of you can't play dumb
Right.
when it comes to CITES.
Yeah. I'm getting flashbacks to the invasive species podcast we did with Alicia.
Yes.
And we were talking about so rusty crayfish were recently put on the prohibited list, not because they're endangered, but because they're highly invasive and they've started invading habitats that are very similar to our environment here. And there was this weird thing where a lot of hobbyists were like, well, they're being grandfathered in. And it was one of those things where it's like, no, that's not how that works.
Right. Yeah. Well, the marbled crayfish, the self-cloning crayfish, there's a crayfish that you don't need two. It will self-clone.
Okay.
Right? And that one went around the hobby like hotcakes, and particularly in the clubs because that's easy. What are called BAP points. All the freshwater clubs have their breeders award program where you get points and you compete for who can breed the most different species.
Okay.
And so those guys went around like hotcakes. But now anybody simply being in possession of marbled crayfish is breaking the law.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, something that can self-clone. That's kind of
I know, right?
that's something you might want to be concerned about, probably.
Right.
We're fortunate. There's no marine ornamentals that are invasive in Michigan.
Yeah, there was the group going around trying to educate people about Caulerpa for a while. And they were showing up at some of our events. And I'm like, so what do we got to worry about here? And she looked at me like sheepishly and went, you really don't. Yeah, she was doing her whole spiel on what's happening. There's a public aquarium in the Mediterranean that you can go dive there and you can see this massive Caulerpa field right where their lines drain into the Mediterranean, and then in Monterey Bay and a couple other places in California. And she was going into this whole spiel about how much of a problem Caulerpa is. And I said, so, right. Yeah.
Well, we have a problem now with mothballs. You've heard about that, right?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, that's been a huge
They're
thing.
pretty much gone.
Yeah.
I don't know if those will come back anytime soon.
That was a product you guys carried?
We did.
What?
Sold them like crazy.
Not from that particular like contamination source. Our source actually keeps all their mothballs chilled. So the mussels shouldn't be able to survive at the temperatures they keep it, but they still cut off all supply just to make sure they weren't a part of that in any way.
Better safe than sorry.
Yeah,
Yep,
I say.
exactly.
I'd rather not have them at all than risk anything.
Well, the big challenge, in Michigan, the zebra mussels are everywhere in Michigan. And yes, we still need to be aware and conscious of it, but that ship has sailed. Oregon and Washington State, those places are not overrun with zebra mussels yet, and they were finding them in Washington State and Oregon, and that
Yeah.
problems that we don't want to deal with.
I want to rant on this a little bit, just because you touched on a chord. So Michigan is unique in that we have the biggest diversity in unionid mussels in the world. In the state of Michigan, we have over 20 species. And so I don't want people to be flippant with, we have zebra mussels in the big lakes. A lot of these small lakes
Yeah.
that have these unique species have not been contaminated yet. Follow the rules, guys.
Right. Yes.
Don't ruin it for everyone.
Right. Yeah, I certainly didn't mean to
I
say.
know. I want to
Yeah.
be very clear to our audience.
Yes.
That's Charles' soapbox on a soapbox.
Yeah. Keep that soapbox going.
So
Yeah. So where do the best corals come from?
A&M.
Perfect.
2 points, Bill. You're probably alluding to. We should talk about your facility down in the Keys now. How's it going down there? You got wiped out a couple years ago, right?
We got wiped out by Hurricane Irma.
ooh.
We kind of took a double whammy that year because Irma happened in September of 17. And to those that don't really know, we have a state licensed aquaculture facility in Florida where we grow algae, a lot of algae. Some we want, some we don't want. Cato, Alva. We grow corals, some bangais, and it's been an ongoing project. It's kind of a passion of mine. I'm a fish guy from way back, and somehow I got into the coral thing, and we started this facility down there. And in 2017, Irma came through, and we've been rebuilding since then. But then 2018, Indo shut down, so you couldn't even get a lot of brood stock. So been kind of a slow process. Any of your listeners or you guys know, you start with one piece of coral, and 6 months later, if you're lucky, you got 3 pieces or 6 pieces or whatever. And 6 months later, you got 9, and then you got 3, and then so
Yeah.
I don't know. My wife will not, if we're having a discussion and she's here, she will say, my hobby down there is costing a lot of money. So, but
I need to walk back. You guys were doing your own bangais?
yeah, prior to Irma, we're
not
just
know
starting to
that.
get them going again. Yeah.
Oh, that's awesome. That's really cool stuff.
It happens real easy. We're not doing anything technical,
No, I
right?
know. But, like,
They pretty much take care of themselves.
Just to have it as a wholesaler that's a really cool project.
We've got 8-foot coral runs down there, and prior to the storm, we had 74 of these tanks completely full, probably 35,000 pieces of coral on hand or something. And there was breeding pairs in most of the runs.
I love that.
Yeah.
That's tragic.
And is it back up? Okay, so you're still rebuilding.
Yep.
How many of those 74 tanks are back up and running?
About 30.
30.
Yeah.
Okay.
It was a challenge because right after the storm, housing was a problem. I mean, everything was a challenge. It literally last year was finally when we got housing back. And then we had COVID, so we couldn't travel. So I don't know, but it's a cool Now that would be a road show for your podcast, right? Or for your
Yeah.
YouTube.
We'll go anywhere you take us, Bill.
I like it.
It's a really cool project because it's a really, I hate to overuse the word, but it's a green. I mean, we're not growing under halides or LEDs. We're growing under natural sunlight. So it's a very low impact project, and we don't have any of that yellow Phoenix super coral yellow yet, but
It's all in the name, Bill.
yeah. So it's cool. We enjoy it, and
Yeah.
A&M is the primary customer. We ship the coral back to A&M, and we distributed it out of there.
Right. I like it. Hopefully one of these days I'll get down there and see it.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yep.
That'd be cool.
So A&M has a few other distinctions in the industry. Would you like to plug that now?
I'm going to put a plug in for our CChem vendor partner.
There we go.
So A&M is primarily a livestock supplier, fish, coral, and inverts, but we also carry several aquarium product lines and distribute those as well. And one of the lines that we're real proud to support is CChem. And CChem has done a fantastic job for not only the industry but also for the independent shops with their Aquavitro line, supporting the independents. And A&M has a distinction of being the only platinum certified CChem dealer in the country. Several of our people at A&M have been down to the platinum training, and that's kind of cool. So we appreciate their support, and we work closely, and we use a lot of their products in-house, and we definitely recommend them. So.
Yeah, we do the same. Yeah. We aren't platinum yet. I think we just figured out this week that we meet the financial and SKU qualification to become a platinum dealer.
Well, if you're not sure, we'll get you some more SKUs.
All right. That sounds good.
Sounds great.
Solid.
Yeah, I like it.
We rarely regret getting anything from CChem.
Yeah, it's always
Yeah.
good stuff. Yep. And we carry a lot of the Aquavitro and move a lot of the Aquavitro product too.
I don't know if I'm supposed to tell you this, but they're coming out with a doser.
Are they really?
Yeah.
Really?
Oh, cool.
Aquavitro or CChem? I mean, whatever, but
yeah.
I'm just curious.
CChem.
Cool.
It's a little 2-part doser that's controlled by your iPhone.
Sweet.
I think I know some service tanks.
I'm probably going to get in trouble for saying this. I
By
just
the
found out
time
about it
this-
today. So
By the time this comes out, they'll have already released it. It's
Yeah,
fine.
and the two people watching on Facebook Live, they won't tell anybody. I'm sure of it.
Get your pre-orders in now.
Yeah.
CChem's happy to have that shared. So
We've actually released a few videos on Seacom products.
Yeah.
That just because, like a few times we were just like, we really just want to talk about this for a while.
Yeah, yeah, it's good stuff.
I will put another plug in for a couple of the products here since we're plugging,
Go for
right?
it.
Go for it.
You bet.
We use Tropic Marin salt in house. I don't know what you guys use necessarily here, but we've been a Tropic Marin supporter for 20 plus years, and it's the most consistent salt that we found, and it's the cleanest. We have 1,500 gallon vats that we mix in every day, and we never clean those vats. I mean, it's a pharmaceutical grade salt that's very clean, and it's consistent. And I'm not knocking CChems or other vendors, but as far as salt wise, that is the product that we like and we prefer. And maybe I'm not supposed to be plugging it, but
You're fine.
No, you
I'm sharing
we
what
definitely
we're
do
doing
have
here.
to clean our vats on a pretty regular basis.
Yeah.
Maybe we should clean them a little more often than we do. But
Yeah.
So
Well, that's how that
I
goes.
mean, being the farm has natural well water that is consistently beautiful.
That's nice.
But here we have to take and make our own water.
we do. Yeah.
Challenges of a distributor versus a retailer versus a hobbyist, they're pretty much all the same. They're just different scales and different times and different problems. I mean, but we're all kind of trying to figure out the best way to keep these animals and these corals and these fish healthy. And and happy, right?
Doing the
about-
ridiculous thing of trying to compress the ocean down into a little box.
To a 12-gallon tank.
12 gallon tank.
And you actually
Yeah.
have more coral in that than
I mean,
Yeah.
a 1,200 gallon tank, if you're talking about the ocean, it's just as crazy, I think.
Yeah, it's true. It's true.
Still worth it.
Yep, it's true.
That's it.
All right. Well, Bill, I can't thank you enough for coming out and spending the evening with us tonight. This has
Sure.
been fun.
We could easily go another hour, I'm
Yeah.
sure.
if you have more beer, we can
We
go.
got some more beer here, so well this one's gone, but there's more downstairs, so we might have to have another one to close this out. Yeah, this has been really cool and kind of nice to kind of peel back that curtain a little bit and learn a little bit more about the mysterious side of the hobby that we don't get to find out that too much about.
Thanks so much for joining us. This has been a lot of fun. And for any of you at home that have been listening, if you have any questions for us or for Bill, we'll pass them on. We can't promise anything. You can email podcast@watercolorsaquariumgallery.com. We'll definitely post this episode on our Facebook page for discussion if anybody wants to chime in. But in the meantime, we'll just keep up with you wherever we can.
Thank you so much for listening. Let's have lots of fun and keep those hands wet.
Thank you.